Hello there, sword friends. Today I'm going to tell you about this sword right here. It is the Arms and Armor Schloss arming sword, long sword, some kind of sword, something like that. I believe it's called an arming sword on their website, but it has a grip for two hands, so maybe it's a long sword. I don't really know. This is not my area of expertise, you might say. But I am going to tell you about this sword because I think it's cool as shit, and I think it's an underrated sword and something that should get more attention than it does. I want to call out before I talk any more about this that I am sorry about the audio. It's even noisier inside my house, and I thought, what the fuck, let's come out here and give it a try. But also, this is a second-hand sword, one of the older iterations. Arms and Armor has supposedly said on their website that they do make a new one that is a little more refined and closer to the original that it's trying to reproduce. So this one's a little bit off. I've included measurements, weapon dynamics, and all that kind of stuff in the link down below. It's a $1,000 sword, but again, this being secondhand and older, it may not represent exactly what Arms and Armor is capable of putting out today. So do know that. The other thing I want to note, I'm not an expert in this kind of stuff. I'm not gonna destroy the sword. I'm gonna try and cut with it, but it's not particularly sharp. It may have been out of the factory, and it certainly has a profile that can hold an edge, which hopefully the video will show. But it's not going to cut particularly well. It's a spoiler there. This is going to be a talking head video, and if you're not too inclined to listen to that, then you may want to tune out now. Anyway, I do think it's a particularly fun sword, and honestly, I've kind of hesitated on making this video because I thought maybe if I put an edge on it and cut with it that it would show more, but I just haven't gotten to it, so fuck it, I'm going to do the video. But also, it feels amazing in my hand, and the weapon dynamics, computer and measurements, and all that kind of stuff don't really explain why. So I'll include those, but basically they don't line up with what I'm feeling in my hand, and maybe I screwed it up. I'm not exactly sure. Anyway, why don't I just start talking about it? And do know, I suppose, before I move on, if I haven't said it already, it's a little bit daisy in my head to figure out if I've talked about this, that, or the other. It is $1,000-ish from Arms and Armor right now. There's some customization options. This appears to be among the simpler version, simple black grip. So anyway, that's what's up. So I'm going to talk about the pommel. It's a twisted pommel. I'm sure there's some sort of name for it. And basically, as I look at this pommel, what I need to keep in mind is that this is supposed to be a recreation or a replica of an actual original sword in their possession. And I think they did a pretty darn good job. As I compare this to the 3D model that's available online for the original sword, this looks like a not rusted out version of the same thing. It has some imperfections, as does the original, and that's again something I want to mention. This sword has a handmade kind of feel to it, which is going to drive some people crazy. But if you look at what it's trying to recreate, really the focus here is how close to that original sword does it get? And to me, I think they're really capturing the spirit of how it looks, but more, I think, on how it feels, and I'll touch on that in just a second. Anyway, so twisted pommel, it has some handmade feel to it, and basically I think it overall looks pretty good. It's pretty well done, and it spins around and looks pretty. If I move on to the grip, well, this again looks quite a bit like the grip, except not disheveled and old. Now mine might be a little disheveled and old because it's very old, but it has some dimension here. You can see that it swells in the center, it narrows towards the crossguard, and then it turns into a cylindrical form towards the base, which is kind of what the original looks like. The crossguard, actually, before I move on to the crossguard, some bits to note here is that as it's aged, this is held up actually really, really well. It's been obviously mistreated at some point in its life, but it's still tight. Nothing is loose. I don't feel the stitching any kind of way that's bad. There's no schmutz or garbage around the areas here, or if I go up to the crossguard, there's no gunk or anything like that on it. So props to Arms and Armor. And the peen area here doesn't look like it's been hammered on haphazardly. There's imperfections, there's signs of handmadeness, if you will, but it doesn't look like it was done by unskilled hands. Okay, crossguard. So it's got these little twisty bits on the quillins, and then this shape is one that took me a little while to get used to. It's got these little nubby quillins that come off, and then this square bit here, and aesthetically it just doesn't mesh with what my thoughts of a longsword of quality should be. It looks odd, but again, this is what the original looks like. So I have to give them props. They've recreated the original quite well here. I think the fit and finish could be maybe a little better, but overall, I'm not going to really complain. I think overall, it captures the spirit and aesthetics of the original. There are some tool markings and things like that, but I've actually had this thing to some tools myself, so I don't know if this is from Arms and Armor, but though it wouldn't be uncharacteristic of their work. I've seen some tool markings on their previous work. Again, though, I think it captures the spirit. The gap in the crossguard is not huge. It could be smaller, but again, the original. You can see the gap in the crossguard there as well. Blade-wise, it's a 36-inch blade, and I want to say that the original version is pretty close to the same thing. They've changed some things about the length of the grip and where the center of balance lands on the newer iteration, but I believe the blade is pretty similar. Profile-wise, you can probably see, well, hopefully you can see it. I'm going to show some closer bits of the blade. It's got a little nubby tip here, a strong central ridge that runs all the way out to the end, and then it has kind of a transition about 27.5 inches where the blade starts to narrow more acutely, but from there it stays pretty wide. It's 2 inches wide here and about 1.5 inches wide where that kind of narrowing transition starts to go. It has some distal taper. It's about 1/4 inch at the base, and then out here it tapers. I've provided measurements in the description down below, though. Again, not particularly sharp, not a particularly acute point, but I do want to say that the ridge is pretty prominent. There's ripples and imperfections and signs of sanding and all of that malarkey, but overall I think it's actually a pretty clean execution, especially for how old it is. The center ridge doesn't wander anywhere particular. It's also straight. If I hold it up to my hand, it doesn't cant or twist around at all. And one thing I just want to say is that this sword feels amazing in my hand, and as I reflect on the weapon dynamics computer measurements that I've taken down below, it just doesn't really represent what I think this sword feels like. It seems much heavier. This feels very nimble in my hand, so maybe I got to recheck my measurements. Maybe I've screwed up somewhere. Take the measurements with a grain of salt. I tried to be accurate and all of that. It's my best attempt, but this feels really good in my hand. If I stand back here, I'm throwing it out. You can't necessarily hear because of the construction and nonsense going on in the background, but I can throw the sword out. I can stop it. It feels agile. It feels like I have point control. It feels like I could move the sword around. It feels comfortable in one hand. It feels like I have authority in two. The point of balance is a little high for one hand, but again, I don't have any problem throwing the sword out, keeping the point roughly where I want it. My form is not anything specific or special, but the point is, it feels like a very well-handling sword, and that doesn't seem to be the case as I look at the measurements that were taken. Anyway, overall, the Arms & Armor Schloss is also holding a special place in my heart because I got a chance to go and actually see it in person, or at least the original at Arms & Armor. So I got to put this sword against the original one, lay it on the table, show it, kind of hold and compare and contrast the two, and I would say that this felt like a pretty accurate representation of the original. The original felt a little more nimble, but had lost a little bit more material. While I was there, unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to take the newer iteration of the Schloss and lay it side by side, but I did actually hold the newer iteration, and it felt kind of, the things I love about this sword were kind of enhanced in that version. It felt even more lively. So for a Type 18A sword, it felt, I don't know. I don't necessarily know that I have a lot of opinion or authority on what a Type 18A sword should feel like, but this one felt really good. The newer iteration felt better, and either one of them felt very close to the original. So in terms of getting something that captures the aesthetic and the spirit of the historic original, then I think you're getting that. And if that's something you want, I think this is a sword that goes kind of has some unsung praises. I really like the feeling. I don't know that this would have been one that I ever willingly went out and bought because I just inherently don't like the look of it. Honestly, it looks pretty drab in my mind. But in holding it, it's something special. It feels really good in the hand, and that's kind of where I started to maybe give it a second chance. And over time, it's become one of the European style swords that I'm drawn to. Maybe not aesthetically, it's still doesn't catch my eye the way others do, but in terms of dynamic and feeling, this one feels really great to me. All right, so that's really all I have to share. I know the information has been sparse and the cutting hasn't been terribly eventful, and I'm not exactly the most knowledgeable host here about this sword, but in terms of an underrated sword, I thought this sword bared some mentioning. It's a fun feeling piece of equipment, and not a lot of people talk about it. There's not a lot of videos or anything like that about the sword, and given that it's representing a historical piece that's in Arms & Armor's collection, and given that it feels so good, I thought it bared mentioning. Now, the thing I also want to point out, again, it bears reminding, is that my measurements may not be accurate. I can't quite figure out where I've gone astray in the weapon dynamics computer, because this should feel good, and the dynamics don't seem to show that it should. I think I'm accurate on it, but anyway, the point is, it's a very fine feeling sword, and it's representative. It captures both the aesthetics and the dynamics, more importantly, of the historic original. It's made by some cool people that are sword nerds, and I'd encourage you to take a look. Another special shout, Arms & Armor actually has a YouTube channel, and I can't fathom why they have less subscribers at this time than I do. So I'm going to put a link to their YouTube channel down below. They put some fun historical content out there. I'd encourage you to check them out. Anyway, that's all I've got for you. As always, cheers, and thanks for watching.